This episode is brought to you by Sisu Sauna. Sauna and contrast therapy offers a natural and holistic approach to wellness, providing numerous benefits that support physical, mental, and emotional well-being. Heat from the sauna helps relax muscles and improves blood circulation, aiding in the recovery of strained or fatigued muscles. It can also help reduce muscle soreness after intense physical activity. We've been lucky enough to have Sisu Sauna on board as a partner of Power Monkey Camp for the past few camps, and it's been an incredible addition. We've added contrast therapy as a station to our camp, and the campers and staff have loved the added experience. I try to jump in the sauna as often as I can. We're in Tennessee for our camp, and I can't wait to add one of these to my home gym. Sisu saunas are made in the USA using the highest quality wood and steel products, plus their new Hume heaters are the best on the market. If you're interested in trying contrast therapy, we cannot recommend these saunas highly enough. Please use the code POWERMONKEY, all one word, all lowercase, for 5% off. Welcome to the Power Monkey Podcast, where we chat with the best in the world of fitness about what they do. I'm your host, Dave Durante, with my co-host this week being Jordan Samuel, and we have a special guest, Nicole Bonner. Nicole is a former Power Monkey camper turned into one of our most important team members working on our partnership side. She is great in terms of working on a daily basis within the Power Monkey community, but she is also an L1 coach in the CrossFit space and has been doing CrossFit for well over a decade and knows it in and out. The topic for today is specifically around getting your first pull-up. And one of the things that we put on social media recently and got a lot of great feedback on it. And we wanted to dive into this idea of getting your first pull-up as you're a little older in life. Maybe you didn't grow up as a gymnast and it wasn't something that you came out of the womb just doing. What are some of the tools and tips that go into being able to get a movement that is very challenging for a lot of people out there later in life? We look into the resources that come with the Power Monkey training app to help people use the plans in there. We have a Get Your First Pull-Up plan in there. Nicole's been using it. Some other people within our community have been using it. It's a great stepping stone for those of you out there that are looking to get a little stronger in your pulling. And we go through some of the technical components within this podcast. Enjoy. Welcome everyone. Dave Durante here with Power Monkey Fitness again, coming with another movement specific podcast today. We have a special guest. It's going to be me and Jordan kind of hosting today, but we have a third guest with us today, Nicole Bonner, who is a big part of our Power Monkey team as leader of our partnerships and everything we do around camp. She's involved in so many different areas, but she is also a CrossFit coach. She has her L1. She has been in the CrossFit community for a number of years. And she is the everyday person when it comes to what we're going to be talking about with our pulling work. She has a lot of insight into what many of you are probably struggling with, who may be trying to go from that one pull-up to 3 to 5 to 10. And so we're going to have her on to kind of talk about her journey with regards to some of the things she noticed as she was going through her pulling journey. How you guys doing today?
Super great.
Good.
Yeah.
Good. Thanks.
And both of us are wearing the same shirt, which we want to give a little shout out to LSKD for our Run Club shirts. Love them. Getting ready for Hood to Coast in a couple of months, which we can talk about separately. But today's all about those pull-ups.
You know, I can go and put on my Run Club shirt, or I can just take my shirt off. Either option is fine.
Whoa, Jordan.
We're good. We're good. It's not that kind of podcast.
All right. So we're going to talk today about getting your first pull-up and what that really looks like for most people. And before we get into things too deeply, Dave, I want to ask you, for the everyday person, the non-competitor, why do you think it's important to be able to even do a pull-up?
I mean, if you're in fitness, to me, it's one of those things that's just important for basic daily activities in the sense that, like, not if you're looking to compete, not if you're looking to, beat the person next to you, but just being able to pull yourself up is one of those kind of critically important tools as squatting is, in terms of, can I get myself up off the floor? Can I pull myself up if something should go wrong? So in terms of life skills, I find that a pull-up is absolutely critical just to be able to do the things that you want to be doing on a daily basis as you continue to get older.
Clearly the value is there in your mind, because we saw a video recently of your daughter who's 7 years old, and she did with impeccable form, I might say, 5 strict pull-ups. So I don't know if you want to talk about that at all, or if you want to brag a little bit, but is she following the Power Monkey way? Like what's happening there?
She's on the app. She has her own profile on the Power Monkey Training app. She's been very diligent about her training. No, yeah, Alessia started gymnastics a while ago. Like she's obviously been doing stuff with me and Sadie at the house, and over the years she's been in and out of training gymnastics. But this year she said she wanted to make a jump into competitive gymnastics for the first time. And I'm always a little bit. I want to see her do something that she enjoys to do. I don't want to like be someone that's just like a gymnastics dad that's like pushing her to do something, but she wanted to do it. And uh, the coach basically said that she was too far behind the other girls at her age to be able to join the team. And they were like, we missed the window of starting when you were, before you could walk to be able to actually join the team. But she said that they would put her into the system because she knew Sadie and I would do some additional stuff with her at home. And she couldn't do any pull-ups basically when she turned 7 a couple of months ago. And over the course of the last few months, she went from 0 to 5, which was to me, and I don't know if 5 is really her cap right now. She can probably do a couple of more when she's fresh. And so one, I think it's a testament to how hard she's been working. She's been really kicking butt. She's been going to gymnastics 2-3 days a week, and she does additional stuff here at the house. There is some things to be said about strength to weight ratio when you're that small and when you're that young. It's very different than when you're a little bit older. But it was a little bit emotional for me. I wasn't there when she did her gymnastics exhibition last week. I was out of town. Sadie sent me the video of her doing the 5 pull-ups for the first time at the gym, and I got a little teary-eyed when I saw it. So yeah, I'm proud of her. She was kicking ass, and I'm just glad to see that she's actually enjoying it. But it was impressive to see her go from 0 to 5 in such a short period of time.
That's awesome. It seemed like it was such a big deal too for everybody in the gym for her to be able to accomplish that. Was it kind of like that for you when you were younger too, like learning all the gymnastics movements?
To be honest, like there are certain movements when you're a kid in gymnastics that are like hallmark moments, almost like if you're a CrossFit athlete and you do your first muscle up, where that was, and who was there and who was screaming at you and what open workout you might have done it at. And there are a couple of movements like that in gymnastics. Really, the one that sticks out probably the most for me, it was like the first time you do a kip. And a kip in gymnastics is essentially a bar muscle up. It's just the terminology that we use for a bar muscle up. And when you get that for the first time, it's a really memorable moment. It means like you're progressing to be able to do like a full routine on a high bar. And so I remember doing that when I was probably 6 or 7 years old, 7 or 8, something around there. The pull-ups and all that stuff, it just started so early. Like we had a jungle gym in my backyard, and me and my brother, my older brother, I just like followed whatever he was doing. And so like doing pull-ups and climbing rope, we had this. I've never seen this in anyone else's house in my entire life, and unfortunately we don't have it anymore. But I had this pole in my backyard. It was almost like it was like an enormous telephone pole, but it had like little like things you can use to climb. And it was huge. It was probably about 40 to 50 feet up in the air.
Oh my God.
And I used to climb. Yeah, it was just this weird metal thing that was in the back of our backyard. And I used to climb to the top like when I was very little. And we just like climbing was just part of like what we did all the time. So I don't really remember like getting my first pull up. I just remember like it never being something that we didn't do. It was always something just like it was part of play essentially.
Mm-hmm.
For those of you growing up that maybe it wasn't part of play and you didn't get your first pull up until later in your years, don't worry, it's not outside of your grasp. Nicole, how old were you when you got your first pull up?
I'm not going to date myself, but let's just say over 30. So I started CrossFit in 2016. I want to say it probably took me 8 months to get my first strict pull up. And I had to do a lot of stuff outside of class too. So it wasn't just like working on it, during the workout. It was, I had this pull up bar that I would put up inside my house, like those like door frame pull up bars. And I was like, okay, every time I need to go into the bathroom, I'm going to try and do a strict pull up every time. And so put the pull-up bar. I was like ready to go. And eventually it got to the point where I would just use the other bathroom so that I didn't have to like try and do the strict pull-up. But yeah, I want to say it was like 8 months in, and the strength and skill was strict pulling work. And I was like, I'm just going to go for it. And I did it and I got it. And it was like exciting. And I got so excited that I did a jumping pull-up because that was programmed in the workout. And it was one of those rigs where you have the main bar, but then you have another like slightly taller bar. And so I did my strict pull-up, yay, celebrating, excited. And then I did a jumping pull-up and I railed my head against that top bar and I had a unicorn and I cried and it was a mess.
That's not recommended.
I was very distinctly remembering that first pull-up for me. So
Take home point, no jumping pull-ups.
Yeah.
No jumping pull-ups. Exactly. Don't do them. Not worth it.
So it took Nicole, it took you about 8 months. It took Alessia a few months. Dave came out of the womb doing pull-ups. So, but for everybody else out there that doesn't have a pull-up, Dave, what would you say is, if you're following a good program, maybe even the Power Monkey Get Your First Pull-Up program, what do you think is a realistic time frame to go from 0 to 1 and then maybe 1 to 3, 3 to 5, and these sorts of things? And I know it's going to vary from person to person, but to give people at least a little bit of a gauge, like what would you say?
Well, it really does depend on the person's starting point, right? So it's hard to kind of make a general comment. I would say like probably 6 months is a realistic timeline if you're diligent about it. It has to be done consistently. The program that we put together for Get Your First Strict Pull-Up is a 3-day-a-week program meant to be done consistently throughout the week. Give yourself an opportunity to rest between days with all the things all the little pieces and all the little different movement patterns that can be worked on and tweaked. But I think 6 months is kind of a good number if you're going from 0 to 1. And I really think that the 0 to 1 is the hardest part. Going from 1 to 3 is a little bit easier, and then going 3 to 5 is a little easier. But that 0 to 1 is such a monumental jump for most people that it's probably the biggest leap that you got to take.
Why do you think it's so much more of a difficult step to take?
Well, I think there's a mental component, right? Can I do this? Mm-hmm. Like, is it actually physically possible for someone like Nicole that got it after over 30 years old? You've gone 30 years in your life with never having done something. There's a mental breakthrough that you have to get through to be able to say, at this point in my life, have I passed my my physical peak? No, I can still keep pushing. So you have to kind of work through that component. But then also there's movement, hanging parts of it, and what muscle groups need to be activated. Are they dormant muscles that haven't been used before? So, movement mechanics and pulling mechanics and all these little things that need to be kind of worked on, especially if you're thinking about trying to get a pull-up that is like fairly technically sound, and one that can actually start to translate, as we always talk about, to other different variations and higher level skill development, as opposed to just completing one pull-up. Our goal is always to say, okay, this one pull-up can start to translate into, yes, multiple reps, but also higher level skills within this sequence. So, the positioning, the technical components are a big part of it as well.
To that point, do you think that once somebody gets their first pull-up, that would you weigh the value more heavily on getting to that 3 to 5, or making sure that one pull-up is the highest pull that you can make? Like, where do you put the value? Higher pull or more reps?
Yeah, I really like this question. I would answer it like this. I would say that most people focus completely on number of reps towards a standard of a chin-up being the chin over the bar, or pull-up being the chin over the bar, as opposed to thinking that our goal whenever we're working on, if it's getting your first or getting 3 to 5, if you're working on the strength side of getting that pull to be stronger, all of your reps should be worked on towards peak pull, so that you can always continue to work on the next phase of where that pulling action is working towards, not just the standard that's presented of the chin over the bar being the completion of the movement. So I think for most people, it's a really big missed step when you have the opportunity to say, hey, today I'm focusing just on my pull strength, and I'm taking ample rest between my sets. And this is an opportunity for me to get my chin over the bar, but it's also an opportunity for me to work on getting stronger within that area that we completely neglect. So I would first say that any time that you're spending time working on pull-up, you should always be thinking about peak pulls. It should always be a part of the equation. It's not one or the other. So even if you're doing 5 reps, they should be the highest 5 reps that you can get, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And then you eventually apply that to the workout in terms of whatever the standard calls for. So that's kind of more how I would approach it. If you have the opportunity to work on strict pull work as a strength session on its own, always work towards highest pull possibility.
Nicole,
Yeah, I agree. I think that's where like I think I missed the mark. You know, when I first got my first pull up, it was just like, oh my gosh, I got my first one. Let's see how many I can get. And it was never ever a thing of like, oh, let me see how high I can pull. And that's probably why my chest to bars are trash. It's like I just never focused on that peak pull of getting as high as I could, and then pause work of staying in that, and then that slow negative of like really building that strength.
Nicole, question for you. What kind of things did you implement? I mean, you mentioned the bathroom between door pull-up bar, but
Yeah.
like, was there an actual plan associated with it? Did you implement things like pause and tempo work and peak pulls, or was it just if I can get reps under my belt, if I can build consistency? What was kind of your strategy? I mean, you said this was a few years ago, but what was your strategy with regards to trying to achieve that?
Yeah, so it was a lot of negatives for me. So it was like if I could like jump up to a pull up and like slowly come down, I felt like that was really helpful in sort of like that confidence level of saying, okay, if I can hold it here and come down, then at some point I'm going to be able to do it the opposite way. So that was one of the really big things. And then also, shameless plug, I ended up going to Power Monkey Camp as a camper, and so going through that bar station, just getting a few of those drills dialed in to say, okay, I know that this muscle needs to be activated in order for me to really dial in that pull up and that pulling strength was really helpful. So I'd say those couple of things for sure.
Yeah, I love the implementation, and we'll probably get to it, but like using negatives and using pause work, I think is probably glossed over. Obviously not within the Power Monkey community, but it's such an incredible resource in terms of starting to go, one incremental step a little bit higher within those pulls. So just as an easy tool, something that everyone should be implementing if that is a struggle point for you. Continue to think of pause and tempo work. You've heard us say it endlessly, just like you do with your Olympic lifts. This is actually how you build incremental strength on those pulls.
I think too, also, so my question is, when you're getting that first pull up, or if you have pull ups, the muscles that you're activating, like some people are very bicep heavy, some people are very lat heavy. How would you say would be the best way to sort of activate that lat over that bicep?
Well, it comes back to, one of the things that you probably learned your L1, and that is stressed pretty consistently within the CrossFit community, this idea of core to extremity, of the pattern of pulling should never start with the extremity, right? You want to be getting the major muscle group involved first before you start thinking about pulling from the arm. So that means lat engagement first. So just to feel what that's like, there's a couple of ways to do it. What most people will do a lot of scap pulls, right? Of elbow staying locked out. And let me just see if I can get my lat to be engaged and just see if I understand what that movement pattern looks like before starting to pull from the extremity. That's kind of part one. Can I get a good range going in just some scap pulls? However, in the gymnastics world, there's a tool that we use a ton that is something that we implement in our training programs as well, that I think people would benefit from in terms of this exact question. It has to do with more straight arm pull work, a lot more straight arm pull work. So straight arm pull work in the gymnastics world lends itself towards learning things like front levers and Victorians, Victorian would be one of the most challenging ring movements in the entire world. It's basically when you hold yourself out on rings horizontally, but in a position where your stomach is facing up, so supinated. So arms completely locked out, your arms are in line with your hips. It's really, there's been maybe 5 people in the world that have ever done it and done it well, even less than that. But the movements that you work on to try to get that type of a skill of front lever and Victorian are exactly the ones that will engage the lats in a way to get them strong enough for them to be dominant before you start thinking about pulling from the extremity. So I would highly encourage athletes to start incorporating simplified front lever exercises into their training to start to say, okay, I'm going to get my lats strong before I even start thinking about bending my elbow and getting that, extremity muscles involved.
So that would
Okay.
be maybe
Okay.
like a dumbbell Victorian raise or like a ball up or something like that. Would those be good examples of what you're talking about?
Yeah. Victorian raises, weighted Victorian raises, I program endlessly for my clients, especially ones that have trouble pulling. It's one, we can probably put a link in the video. You're just laying down, maybe on a bench with your arms laying by your sides and raising the dumbbells up from the floor. Um, it's a very challenging exercise for a lot of people. It's kind of a weird pattern. But there's another one that I really like to do as well. It's a PVC. Imagine laying down underneath a pull-up bar and wrapping a couple bands, and then putting a PVC between the bands and laying down on the ground on your back and just actively pulling down on the PVCs, closing the gap between your hips and the PVC with straight
Mhm.
arms. We call them basically PVC banded pull downs. And they're meant to mimic the same action, the same kind of lever type action that you'll see in a front lever, but it's fantastic. And we do them with a lot of pause work. So I'll do like 5 reps with 3 to 5 second pause with the hands close to your hips with as much tension as you need within those bands where you can maintain good form. That's an excellent exercise to kind of mimic exactly getting the movement pattern in place that we want to be seeing.
Are you doing that in a hollow position, Dave?
Yeah. Yeah. Hollow position, thinking about kind of keeping your eyes on your toes as you're going through.
Nice. When it comes to, let's say, a CrossFit style class with a bunch of people in it, and we see this all the time where we go somewhere and somebody's doing a modified or scaled version of a pull-up with a couple bands, and then you see them 3 years later and they're still using those same bands, or they haven't made any progressions towards what it is that their goal is getting an actual pull-up. What do you think it is that most commonly, what do you think is the problem why people are stagnating and not making those advancements?
It's the knock on bands themselves with people who say like bands don't work. Bands work. Bands can be a great tool, but a lot of times people use bands more of a crutch than they do a tool. And so they lean into the assistance that the band gives so much that they never understand that the band should be a weaning off of process. Meaning that if you are using, 2 purple bands the first time you're doing a pull up, that the next time that you come towards that same movement pattern, you should be thinking about, hey, maybe I'll ease off on the types of bands I'm doing and try to work more towards full body weight. And so people just get into a rhythm of thinking more about the completion of the workout and the reps within the workout and knowing that if I have those bands, I can complete the workout as is. So some of it's on the athlete to say that the bands are more of a tool than they are a crutch. And how do I start moving away from these so they don't like become kind of a drug I need to lean into? But then it's also imperative on the coach to recognize that this person is using these bands inappropriately or way too much and not kind of in that weaning off of process. The other thing I would say about scaling options and bands is that bands can be great, right? The one thing that I think most people maybe miss out on in bands is that they spot disproportionately, meaning when you're at the
Mhm.
bottom part of that hang, it's spotting you a lot more than when you're at the top part of your pull. So, hey, maybe I'm getting stronger and you're getting stronger at the peak of your pull, but you take the bands away and you can't understand why you can't initiate a pull up at all is because you never really built the muscle group or the pattern to understand the initiation of the pull because the band did all of that work for you all the time.
Mhm.
So you need to be working on the initiation of the pull quite a bit. That's why when we're teaching pull-ups, a lot of what we do is when we go from our scat pulls, the engagement of that major muscle group first, getting the lat involved, we do a lot of half pull work where we can understand the mid ground of going from major muscle group to just lat engagement right into the extremity engagement. So just getting people to understand the pattern involved with starting to actually get the bent elbow involved, which I think is a really important step for a lot of people, and then build towards peak pulls from there. The other thing I want to just mention here, you mentioned the bands as a scaling option, is that one scaling option is not the end all be all. You need to be thinking about it from a
Yeah.
lot of different directions. And like you said, Nicole, negatives is a great way to be thinking about it. And bands might be another one you're thinking about. So I would encourage people that if you're struggling with this or any other scaling movement, don't always approach it from the same scale. You'll get your body becomes very accustomed to the movement patterns that it's doing, and you'll become accustomed to only that variation. So if you're struggling with this, you need to tackle it from different directions, from bottom down, from from bottom up, from top down, using bands, not using bands, using ring rows, using jump negatives, using pauses. Use different variations in your tool belt so you can actually start tackling from different directions.
So you would actually recommend, if in a workout, you would recommend implementing negatives or implementing pauses?
Yeah, that's not necessarily. This is always there's definitely a caveat to that, and I don't know if we need to mention it right now, but for the everyday athlete out there who's doing a CrossFit workout where you hear 3, 2, 1 go, and you're told to go as fast as you can within this workout, it's very challenging for someone to think 3, 2, 1 go. I'm going to try to get the fastest time I possibly can here, or get this work completed as quickly as I can. But on these movements, I'm trying to go really slow. How do you kind of make up between those two thought processes? It becomes very challenging to maximize what the negatives and the pause work is meant for in a setting where you're trying to go as fast as possible. Okay.
Right.
So using negatives and using pause work, in my mind, should be done predominantly as a separate piece, either prior to a workout or post workout, where the athlete can really dive into what the intention is behind those. So you can really like take the time and make sure you're resting and make sure you're really working on positional components rather than just saying, I have no idea what the hell's going on. I'm trying to get this thing done. Let me forget about the pause work. Let me forget about the tempo and just try to get the work done. So it can be challenging to implement them in situations where people are thinking about speed.
So really quickly too, so we talked a little bit about the lat activation versus the bicep activation. Does it matter where you put your hands on the bar to be able to sort of activate both of those two different
Different grip pull-ups will be good for different things, right? So wide grip pull-ups can be really helpful for building upper back and for building a different pulling technique. Narrow grip pull-ups can be really solid as well. I would say for most people when they're first starting out, shoulder in line with hand is where they want to be going. That's going to have the most transferability to higher level skill development in terms of working towards what we consider to be the highest level version of a pull, which is the completion of a bar muscle up. So it's going to be basically your most comfortable and strongest pulling pattern for the highest level variation of that movement pattern. So I would say that if there's a purpose for you to work on wide and you're working on skills that require a wide grip pull or a narrow grip pull, they're valuable. You can definitely do it. And it's great to tackle things from different directions, like I said. But I think for the everyday person, shoulder in line with hand is probably going to be the most universally beneficial in terms of how they're going to be applying it to a workout setting.
Cool. So if you're going through and getting your first pull-up plan, let's say in the Power Monkey Training app, it's 3 days a week. Is there anything that you can be doing between those 3 days a week, whether that's just like hanging off the bar or some of these other drills like the Victorian raises, just to have that sort of everyday?
Sure. So, there are some other, you'll see within the plan itself, it's a 3-level plan. You'll do an assessment, you'll kind of go through it to figure out what starting point you're at. But there's a lot of accessory work. There's a lot of pieces that you'll be doing within that session per day that'll tackle it, like we said, from different directions. But I would say that hanging is something that people should be doing on more often anyway. So just hanging in various grips can be super helpful. It would be helpful for you to become more connected to the apparatus, you feeling like you're in control of what the bar is doing rather than the bar controlling you. So I think hanging in general can be really helpful, from rings, from bar work in different grips, and mixed grip and under grip and over grip. All those things would be really valuable. So I would recommend doing that on a more regular basis. But then also some considerations around mobility. Again, there will be some mobility components in the plan. But one of the things that most people miss out on once they start getting into higher and higher pulls is what you'll see a lot of time is people pull to a point, where they have the strength to, and then to complete the repetition, they'll change body position to make up for what they lack in strength. So instead of pulling the bar to the body, you'll see a lot of chest out, body to the bar to make up for that, basically that gap between where my pull is and, where the bar actually is. So what's really interesting is that if you are able to get to the point where your chin is over the bar and you have a good pull, and maybe you start getting a little bit higher and higher, and you can do a strict chest to bar, you'll start getting to a point where you'll start feeling different muscle groups involved. Meaning,
Mhm.
especially if you're having good position intact, you'll start to feel like the elbow starts to track backwards behind your torso, and you'll start to feel like the anterior side of the pec, of the bicep, of the shoulder start to require a little bit more mobility to be able to complete that repetition well. It's almost like getting into the bottom part of a dip. And so if you're
Mhm.
really tight in the front side of your shoulder and you're weak in the back side, as you get that pull higher and higher, they will become extra challenging in you being able to work on your peak pull. So I would say a lot of mobility for not only hanging and opening up of that shoulder angle, but also for the front part of the shoulder, the pec, the bicep can go a long way. And those are areas of focus you can be doing on a more regular basis throughout the week that will help with your peak pull that most of the time people kind of miss out on, or they lack time spent.
Mhm. So we talked a lot about like the upper half of the body, but not really a lot about the lower half, like the core, the legs, what those should be doing. And I know when I first learned my pull up, it was I got like my chin just over the bar and then maybe did a couple like flutter kicks or like kicked up to like, try and get that
Sure.
okay. Um, so what is a couple things that people can be focused on the lower half as they're working on their first pull up? Or does that even matter?
Well, the weight is the weight, right?
Hmm.
What I would hope for is that, and I don't say this just for aesthetic purposes, right? It's not just to make something look pretty.
Hmm.
It's about a connection. I talk about this all the time with handstands specifically because you don't have a visual on what your legs are doing when you're inverted. It's really hard to know what's going on with when you can't see them. When you're doing a pull up, you potentially can have a visual on what your legs are doing. So there's at least a visual component to say, is my body in the right place or not? So head position and body position go a long way in being able to maximize what the shape of the body is doing so that again it can translate into the next variation of the movement. Not just completion of one pull up, legs all over the place, kicking and I get my chin over the bar and that's the end all be all. So
Hmm.
there's kind of a purpose to the lower half being involved so you can manipulate those body parts within the next part of the skill. You always want to be in control of what the body is doing, knowing where your body parts are at so that you can place them where they need to be within any given movement. So I would say that is there an aesthetic component in terms of making sure that your legs are together and you're keeping a straight line from your shoulder down through your feet? Absolutely. However, there's also this positional component of saying, if I can do that, it's going to allow for the next step of this movement to be done more easily. So the legs are a part of it, but I would say that making sure that you're not initially not overarching your lower back, it can be helpful in making sure the rest of the body is going along in the right direction. You'll see a lot of pull-ups that are extremely arched, more again, just trying to get chest to the bar. And yet, if you're doing those specifically for building back muscles and that's your target, there can be a benefit
Hmm.
for that type of a pull. Um, but I think for most people, it's more of a neglect of understanding what the body is doing. And so it becomes more dead weight and not too much thought going into it. And those are very different
Hmm.
things. If you're doing something with purpose, okay, we can talk about it. If you're doing without thought or without purpose, that's completely different.
I think
Hmm.
my background when I was, doing the whole bodybuilding thing, like we used to do a ton of lat pull downs and these sorts of things. And I think you just explained to me why my lats are weak and my upper back is strong. Because whenever we were doing pull downs and whatnot, we were always intentionally arching our back because partly we're seated, right? So like our hips are already bent. It's hard to like really first of all, we didn't know, but it's also hard to like get that hollow position when your hip is bent like that. And
Mhm.
so we would always have that arch in our back and we would always pull. And so my upper back got very, very strong. But my lats were never a thing that were like, they weren't weak, but they weren't a thing that was like a strong suit for me. So what you just said kind of connected a lot of dots from my past. So thank you.
And again, like maybe for your purposes, building upper back was important,
Mm.
right? Maybe that's a muscle group that you needed to work on for bodybuilding, or it was a neglected area. But it's always important to understand how if you change the mechanic of the pull, what muscle groups are involved, how can I get those to actually work for me? So that's why I said like if you understand the intention of what you're trying to do, it's important rather than just doing it because it's the only way that you know how to do it. And so the pulling mechanic that we're talking about here, like we said, translates a little bit more towards getting to what we consider to be the higher level version of the movement of getting the bar muscle up in place. And I think that's a really important distinction in terms of why we're saying this pulling pattern is very specific here.
Yeah, and I think that it's in a lot of ways in the world that we find ourselves in a lot in this CrossFit world, it's a culture shift that need to be had because most of the time it's just about going faster, getting the work done, no matter how you can get it done, whether you're kipping or you're chicken winging or you're doing whatever it is, you're just getting it done and it's celebrated. And in some ways it's great. But to your point, if you want to have the highest ceiling for your movement and your capability, then there needs to be intention behind and purpose behind what it is you're doing.
Yeah, I think there's a longevity component too. I'm
For
biased
sure.
here, but I think
Yeah.
I think the better the movement quality, the more longevity you'll have available to yourself to be able to do those reps for as long as possible. And also you're going to create efficiency. So the workout's actually going to be better because your pull is better. So, it takes some more intention behind your movement. It can't just be kind of a thoughtless process. And I think that that's hard sometimes because you're so focused on trying to move fast that you forget a lot
Mhm.
of, you know, the intentionality behind why I'm doing something a particular way. And that comes back to what we were talking about earlier, Nicole, of like, if you're working on these things, don't expect to make big changes within a movement that's a struggle for you within a workout. Like the time that needs to be spent to make changes is when you're fresh. Like most of the time, this should be done prior to a workout. That's why. And, I've been to hundreds of CrossFit gyms all over the world. I've taken hundreds of CrossFit classes at gyms all over the world. And I appreciate the time when a coach spends on strength work prior to a workout to really
Mhm.
hone in on a lot of the nuance that comes along with some of the high level skill work that, people are trying to achieve. However, it's almost universally weightlifting movements that are done as part of those strength sessions. I
Mhm.
rarely, I'm not going to say never because there's a couple um, great gyms that, great gyms, meaning they have some gymnastics background that spend time on push and pull work prior and positional components on what the core is going to be doing, especially if it's a gymnastics day. But I see it almost universally on the weightlifting side where people do, okay, we're doing our squat work, we're doing our overhead work, there's so much more emphasis put on positional components for weightlifting and not nearly enough on the gymnastics side.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I want to touch on something that you mentioned earlier, where if you're working your first pull up, there is that sort of like mental component, and that mental block and that mental challenge. And I know that you probably learned your first pull up at 2, but is there something when you were learning a gymnastics movement that you sort of told yourself before you attempted that first, drill or skill, um, that you sort of like went through in your head before you made the attempt?
Well, we're talking 40 years ago now. This
Well,
is
I mean, you're welcome.
no, to be honest, I don't think personally, um, I don't remember those kind of things being in place because one of the tools that we use in the gymnastics world, especially with kids, because it's a lot easier, is we do a lot of spotted pull-ups. We do a lot of
Mhm.
spotted pull-ups, which basically is the same as what a band would do, except it's a uniform spot from top to bottom instead of a disproportionate spot the way we talked about. So the coach basically allows you to work on your form. The coach allows you to work on your peak pull. The coach allows you to get some reps under your
Mhm.
belt only spotting as much as needed where you're able to do the movement on your own. So that's why, with Alessia, we're able to get through a lot of reps because, she's light. I can get her through reps. She can work on movement pattern. And that's part of the learning process. And it's one of the things I've been trying to emphasize so much within the CrossFit space, the people that we work with and how we're teaching Power Monkey is, you know, yes, it's harder to spot an adult that is a little heavier than a 7-year-old kid. But that doesn't mean that it's not possible. And it doesn't mean that you shouldn't find the value in working in groups and finding a strength partner and learning how to spot each other
Mhm.
effectively and confidently so you can actually start having another tool in your tool belt. And so for me, one of the first things I remember on my pull work is having a coach spot me through the repetition so that I could actually get some under my belt.
Mhm.
When you have somebody spot you in a pull-up, Dave, how is it they do that? By the ankles? Do they get behind you at the lats? Like, where is what you think the optimal place to spot be?
I think when you're first starting out, for most people, there's probably a tendency for that person to be weak around their core. So I prefer to have hands around the waist, as long as the person's comfortable with it, all those things in terms of just making sure you're on the same page. Comfort level is important so the person can focus on the movement pattern. Hands around the waist, so you're in a position to make sure that you can control their body as much as you need to, as much as they need to. Okay. As the person becomes a little bit stronger, I think spotting underneath their feet can be helpful, because what it will do, it will force them to engage their core a little bit more. If their core is weak and all over the place, you'll notice that their body will kind of wave through the action if you're just spotting them on their feet. But it could be a good cue, and a good tools is actually something that um, our amazing ring coach at camp, Duke Van Fleet, does quite a bit at camp to help people engage their core. He'll spot them from their feet to help say, okay, I'm not going to do that midsection work for you. You have to do it on your own. So it's by spotting on the feet, it can give the person a little bit of an extra engagement to make sure that they're aware of what's happening in their midline.
Nice. I like that. We might have to try getting that worked in a little bit more often at the local CrossFit gym here that I help out at.
Better spotters, better spotters, confident
Yeah.
spotters. I've been mentioning this so much to the courses that I've been teaching, that if you become a good spotter in the gym, whether you're an owner, you're a coach, you're another member, you will become the most highly sought after coach or other member in your gym, because people will trust you to keep them safe. And gymnastics movement, especially when they're learning for the first time, are scary for people. They don't want to get upside down. They're scared from hanging from the bar, let alone pull themselves above the bar. If you can create an environment where that person feels safe and confident, they will go to you to work on things because they know that you put them in good hands. So becoming a good spotter basically means you're going to become a better coach.
It's like DeFritis on Thursday night at camp with all the back.
Oh man,
teaching like 50 people how to do a back tuck.
I don't know how he does that. I am so grateful that he's willing to do that. That dude is a beast for spotting hundreds of people who've never done a backflip before through backflips. That's hold strong, little bicep. Hold strong.
Nicole, do you have any other questions for Dave regarding pull-ups?
No, I feel like we covered a lot. I think it was really good insight to say, like, okay, what are some other things that we could be doing accessory wise? I never even thought about Victorian raises. And now I have a feeling that we're going to see those in the CrossFit Games as the next highest level gymnastics movement. But I really loved what when you talked about the importance of having a spotter, and spotting for handstands and spotting for ring muscle ups felt like such a no-brainer, but it was very much such an aha moment of, oh, we could also be doing this for pull-ups, and should be doing it for pull-ups.
Yep.
So I think that was really, really cool.
Agreed.
Anything else from you, Jordan?
I am good, man. Is there anything you would like to add to cap this off, or?
No, I mean, one big take-home point for me is just reiterating the importance of straight arm work. Straight arm work for people working on their pull. The bent arm work will come. It'll be something that you actually work on pattern-wise probably more often, but don't neglect the straight arm work so you can get those lats involved prior to thinking about what happens from the extremity. So yes, Victorian raises, but those PVC pull downs, check out the link. Hopefully it'll be in the link. Just some,
Yeah, I'll throw them in.
to our YouTube channel, because they're great resources. So take advantage of them.
Dave, how many strict pull-ups can you do?
Not a lot. Don't ask me that, because my pull-up. My pull-up is not great in relation to my pull work. It's great in relation to the everyday person because I can still do a couple. But my push has always been stronger than my pull. I think I can probably do at this point strict pull-ups somewhere between, like, I don't know, maybe 25, somewhere around there.
But to illustrate his earlier point, we did a photo shoot a couple weeks ago, and he, I think without training at all, was still able to do a strict bar muscle up. So maybe he can only do 25 or so strict pull-ups, but to be able to do a strict bar muscle up is no joke. And that kind of illustrates his point earlier about working on peak pulls versus volume.
Yeah,
I
Jordan,
can still do that.
How many
Every time I do a strict bar muscle up, I'm like, this might be the last one that I have.
Well, we got it on
It's a
film
celebration
time,
of the last instead of the celebration of the
and
first.
it's always for like a photo shoot or some IG video that I gotta put together. Like, can I get my body over the bar today? Yes. So I was able to do it last week. So
we had a couple
Still-
funny
still
faces
there.
on the camera, so that'll be I'll have to put it up.
Well, thanks for the input today, Nicole. Let's take you from those 5 pull-ups to 10. and
I'm on it.
keep us posted on the journey. Jordan, how many can you do?
I think I can, if I was really working, I could probably do 20. But,
Yeah.
So not a huge volume either.
Well, I appreciate the conversation on this, guys. It's always good to dive a little deeper into these things. For the listener out there, please be sure to head over to powermonkeyfitness.com. But for a lot of these things that we're talking about, I would head to our YouTube channel, just Power Monkey Fitness. Our YouTube channel is a great resource for all of our videos. We're always putting new content around some of these technical pieces. Our events are coming up. We will be at the CrossFit Games at CrossFit Iron Horse. Come work with us from Wednesday to Friday of that week. We got some sessions going on that week. And then our next Power Monkey Camp will be September 22nd to September 28th. It will be our 22nd Power Monkey Camp. We want to see you there. Hopefully, we'll see you in the fall. Take care.